A 13-car pileup, more crashes than I can count, and a literal pit lane bust-up sounds like the plot from a movie. But this all happened at the single most dramatic race in Formula One history. We haven't even scratched the surface of the chaos this race had to offer. So, strap in as we take a deep dive into the infamous 1998 Belgian Grand Prix. Qualifying itself was nothing short of exhilarating, with David Coulthard and Mika Häkkinen battling it out for pole position in their McLarens. Coulthard had been commandingly fast all weekend, but Häkkinen, who was leading the championship, kept his cool, snatching pole on his very last lap by a mere 1/10 of a second, securing a front row lockout for McLaren. At the same time, Damon Hill and Michael Schumacher were battling for third spot on the grid. Hill gave it his all, edging out Schumacher, who was left with fourth place, despite having his fastest lap time deleted due to speeding under a yellow flag. Eddie Irvine in the second Ferrari would line up behind his teammate in P5, leaving Ferrari with a disappointing qualifying result. And to round off the top six, Jacques Villeneuve set an impressive lap time, especially considering he had crashed at over 180 miles per hour the previous day. When race day rolled around, the weather was dry and perfect, is what the drivers were wishing. But obviously, this is Spa, so it just had to rain. In the morning warm-up session, Michael Schumacher displayed his legendary wet weather skills, setting a blistering pace, whilst others, such as Coulthard, were less fortunate, as his McLaren ended up in a wall. And let's just say this wouldn't be the last of Coulthard's troubles this weekend. As the race loomed closer, the conditions only became more treacherous, with most drivers, such as Hill and Coulthard, opting for full-wear tyres to be on the safe side, whereas Villeneuve, Alesi, and most importantly Michael Schumacher, instead opted for intermediate tyres, taking a humongous gamble. As the race began, Häkkinen made a respectable start, leaving Coulthard, who was struggling with the slippery conditions, in the dust. However, after just the first corner, Häkkinen's lead was already under pressure from Villeneuve, who had a mighty start. Meanwhile, Hill had fallen from P3 all the way down to P7 after suffering from unholy levels of wheel spin, leaving Michael Schumacher to inherit P3. Whilst the race leaders were away without much drama, the rest of the grid would suffer a different fate as the race took a catastrophic turn. The blinding conditions made it impossible to know exactly what happened, but it's widely believed that Irvine made contact with Coulthard's McLaren, sending him hurling into the wall and then into the path of the oncoming cars. This crash truly is brutal to watch, as car after car continued to barrel into each other at frightening speeds.
Oh, this is quite appalling. This is the worst start for a Grand Prix that I have ever seen in the whole of my life.
It seems almost impossible to believe, but all of the drivers walked away from the crash without sustaining any major injuries, with Barrichello being the only driver to sustain a minor injury to his arm, which ended his weekend. In total, a record-breaking 13 cars were involved in the crash, which littered the track with pieces of carbon fiber. After over an hour of removing the debris, the race was finally ready to restart, as drivers such as Irvine and Coulthard would use their team's spare cars, although Rosset, Panis and Salo didn't restart, as the spare car was instead given to their teammates. In fact, the only team to escape the first lap unscathed was Jordan, as Ralf Schumacher had strategically parked his car to avoid the ensuing carnage. But the chaos of this weekend was far from over. In fact, it had only just begun. As the lights went out for the second time, Hill got a phenomenal start, rocketing into first place past Coulthard and Häkkinen in the McLarens. But whilst Hill had a perfect start, redeeming his earlier mishap, Häkkinen's start was nothing short of a nightmare. Before even rounding the first corner, Häkkinen lost control of his car, spinning 180 degrees in the middle of the track. Stationary and facing the wrong way, all Häkkinen could do was watch as the Sauber of Johnny Herbert ploughed into him, ending both of their races in dramatic fashion. The crash promptly brought out the safety car, but at least the race wasn't being stopped again. As if things couldn't have been any worse for McLaren, David Coulthard also struggled on the first lap as he lost control of his car, careering into the path of the Benetton of Alexander Wurz, sending them both into the gravel trap. Fortunately, Coulthard didn't sustain much damage and rejoined the race, although he was now firmly at the back of the pack. As the cars lapped behind the safety car, the new running order stood with Hill in P1, followed by the Ferraris of Michael Schumacher and Eddie Irvine in P2 and 3. After 2 tense laps, the safety car exited the track, leaving the drivers to fight for positions once again. Immediately, Hill took off, with his Jordan looking surprisingly quick in the wet conditions. Schumacher was close behind, but Hill's impressive driving kept him at bay by over a second for the first 3 or so laps. Hill was desperately hoping for the conditions to dry up, so have a guess what happened? Yeah, you guessed it, the rain only got worse. I mean, this is Spa after all. The Jordan seemed to be struggling with the heavier rain, so Michael used this to his advantage, slowly reeling in Hill until on lap 7 he made his move, diving down the inside of Hill on the bus stop chicane to claim P1. Now, if Schumacher could just hold this position, he would overtake Mika Häkkinen as the championship leader. So, let's just hope nothing bad would happen to him later on. Further back in the pack, Verstappen, no, not that one, this one, would suffer from a blown engine on lap 8, ending his race. Just the following lap, Irvine would undergo a rapid, unscheduled disassembly of his Ferrari after missing a chicane and smashing into a curb. Whilst he did manage to get his car going again, the damage resulted in a lengthy pit stop, costing him valuable positions on the track. The worsening conditions saw Ralf Schumacher execute a strategic pit stop on lap 11, switching to full wet tyres, a move which would be followed by the rest of the grid on lap 16. Well, Villeneuve was the exception to this, as he decided to stay out on his intermediate tyres for an extra lap, and that didn't exactly end well. With Villeneuve out, there were only 12 cars left on track, which quickly dropped to 11 after the gearbox of Esteban Tuero's Minardi decided it didn't want to live anymore. Anyways, after an eventful few laps, Michael Schumacher had established a commanding lead of 22 seconds over Hill, who was a further 22 seconds ahead of his teammate Ralf Schumacher, who had reaped the rewards of his early pit stop, gaining several places. By lap 24, Ralf Schumacher had masterfully reduced the gap to Hill to just 10 seconds, and his big brother Michael had extended his lead to over 30 seconds, and now seemed certain to win the race and claim the lead of the Drivers' Championship. But Michael wasn't taking it easy. In fact, he was pushing harder and harder each lap, something that would come back to bite him big time. Michael had already had one close call with the arrows of Diniz on the previous lap, but this didn't deter the German as he closed up to Coulthard, who he was about to lap. Despite having a 30-second lead and an almost certain victory, Michael seemed to be getting frustrated that he couldn't pass Coulthard instantly. Now, in treacherous conditions like this, the safe option would be just to bide your time and carefully overtake at exactly the right moment. But Michael's anger and impatience got the better of him, as he attempted to overtake Coulthard with extremely poor visibility. In an instant, the Ferrari of Schumacher was turned into a tricycle as he collided with Coulthard's McLaren. Spectators could only look in disbelief as the three-wheeled Ferrari limped onto the pits, joined by the damage-stricken McLaren. Before he even left the car, the rage of Michael was palpable as he flung his steering wheel at his mechanic and jumped out of his car. He stormed out of his garage on a warpath, pushing anyone out of his way as he marched into the McLaren garage and confronted an almost bewildered Coulthard, who didn't even have the chance to take his helmet off. Things began to heat up, and I mean really heat up, with Schumacher even accusing Coulthard of trying to kill him. It got so intense that the Ferrari and McLaren teams had to literally step in and physically restrain the two drivers. I mean, I don't think it gets much more dramatic than that. And just to top things off, the other Ferrari retired that very lap, as Irvine lost control of the car after hitting a curb, spinning into the gravel. With just 19 laps to go, Hill was once again thrust into the race lead, but he was far from in the clear, as his teammate Ralf Schumacher was closing the gap to him at an alarming rate. This was only made worse for Hill after a crash between Shinji Nakano and Giancarlo Fisichella brought out the safety car on lap 26, which diminished Hill's lead to basically zero. Eddie Jordan, the owner of the Jordan team, was now facing a difficult decision. Should he order his two drivers to hold position and avoid an embarrassing crash, or should he let them race? After the safety car returned to the pit lane, there was a mere 12 laps to go. Jordan could almost taste the 1-2, and with tensions rising and pleas from Hill on the radio,
If we two race, we could end up with nothing.
Jordan made a decision. He told Ralph's engineer Sam Michael to instruct Ralph to hold position.
Ralph, you cannot overtake Damon. Okay, that is team order. You cannot overtake Damon.
But there was no response from Ralph. In fact, he continued to drive faster and faster. Many feared he would simply ignore these orders, as he was already in a bitter divorce with Jordan, where he was suing the team to join Williams the following year. After several tense minutes and multiple radio calls, Ralph finally replied with a simple 2 words.
Yes, Sam.
A sense of relief flooded the Jordan garage as the 2 drivers came home in P1 and 2, securing not only the team's first win, but also a 1-2 finish, in a season where their best result had only been 4th. The whole team was ecstatic. Well, everyone besides Ralph, who didn't look too enamored on the podium. Anyways, as the rest of the cars crossed the finish line, Alessi claimed 3rd place, followed by the 5 remaining drivers who managed to finish the race, even if some of them were 5 laps behind. All in all, only 8 out of 22 cars finished this Grand Prix, and I think it's fair to say we'll never see another one like it.